Hello and welcome to an episode of the Manufacturing Leaders Podcast with me, Mark Bracknell, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. Today, we welcome Katie O'Brien, the General Manager of Human Resources at Komatsu. Komatsu are a 100-year-old business based in Berkeley. I absolutely love interviewing people who work for businesses like this to open the doors and lift the bonnet on a business like that to really understand, I guess, that secret sauce that makes it so great. What was fascinating about this episode is we talked about culture. We talked about changing the culture, even at a business with such a great reputation, with a low retention, not many leavers, the importance of actually still looking at changing the culture for the better. We talked specifically about their leadership program, which is both internal and external. We talked about the importance of why we try to change things in business and actually why that is important to Katie. Ultimately, we both share the same desire that you should not dread coming to work. I know that sounds ridiculous, but a lot of people do not enjoy their workplace. A lot of people wait patiently until it's 5 p.m. on a Friday. I don't think that should be the case. I honestly think people should thrive and enjoy coming to work. And we share that same belief. And we talked about that on this episode and how in the position you're in as a HR leader, you're in a perfect position to start to change that mindset mentality at work. This is a really fascinating episode where we talked about Katie's career from recruitment right the way into HR and HR leadership. So please sit back and enjoy. This is definitely one of those episodes where you're going to resonate a lot with, but also take some tangible tips and takeaways. Thank you very much for Katie for being so open and honest in this interview. As ever, please help me grow the channel and grow the show by liking and subscribing. But thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the episode. Right, a massive warm welcome today to Katie O'Brien, who's the General Manager of Komatsu. I absolutely can't wait to meet you today. So a warm welcome, Katie. How are you?
Thank you very much. Yeah, just General Manager of HR, by the way, not of the whole business.
Yes, yeah. It's really looking forward to this. We've got some good conversations. I'm sure will flow. First question is the same question I ask everybody, which is, what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've listened to some of your podcasts before and trying to think of something that doesn't sound like it's just from a textbook. So I think leadership for me is ultimately it's about bringing people along to get to where you want to go. But I think there's three key things for me, which are curiosity. I think that's really important to learn more about your own specialism. So for me, HR, but also, for leadership, your own organization, and being open-minded to different ideas and continuously learning. However, if you're just curious all the time, you won't get anything done ever, or you're sort of changing your direction all the time. So I think there's also something in there about judgment. You won't always get it right, but you have to be willing to decide things. And sometimes there's no obvious answer. There's a lot of nuance. And so you're making the best decision out of either like lots of really good opportunities or lots of potentially bad ones. And you've got to go with something. So being able to commit to that. And then the final one then is commitment, to be able to commit to what you're trying to achieve. It's not always easy, and you might get some pushback initially, but if it's the right thing to do, sort of being prepared to stay the course and carry it on. And that's sometimes commitment to the people, commitment to the organization. And sometimes the best thing is to, people might change course, but it's, I don't know, having commitment, I think, is important.
Which is interesting, because I guess they're linking very nicely. Also, I know it's almost like when you say commitment there, I was actually thinking of the commitment to yourself and the decision you make sometimes, because actually you're right. As leaders, we have to make certain decisions. You have to commit to that. It's not to say you're all in, you can't come back, and you can't hold your hands up and say, actually, that was wrong. But actually, once you've made it, you have to commit to carrying it through. And that's a tricky process sometimes, isn't it? You have to learn that.
Yeah, it is. And there've definitely been some decisions we've made that are not necessarily super popular, and you get some immediate kickback. And the easiest thing in the world would be to say, okay, we won't do it then.
Yeah.
And people might feel happier in the short term, but if it's the right thing to do, then you've got to kind of go with your convictions and push through, really. And we're doing a lot of culture change at the moment, and it isn't easy. And one of the things that was leveled at us when we introduced it was, are you just doing this because it's when it's quiet?
Yeah.
It gets busier, you won't sort of carry it on. And we've had some people saying, we don't actually really want to come to the events that you're doing, but we know it's the right thing, and so we are committed to it, and we are continuing to push it. despite still some pockets of resistance.
Yeah.
And that is important, because we could have just turned around and said, oh yeah, you're right, well, forget it. We'll just go back
Yeah.
to how it was. But
I,
that would definitely wouldn't be the right thing to do.
I've just had this exact conversation actually with funny enough, with another HR leader who, because I was asking about change and do you have any resistance from the top, and they had the same issue that you talked about there, and actually I resonate with it because a lot of changes we've made in the business, sometimes you just want to create change, and we mean very well, but actually there's carrying through with it. But actually, if you don't, if it's something new every month and something new every
Mm.
month, and then they almost lose faith that it's just another
Mm.
change. It's just another change, and we'll have go with it. But this one will be out the window, you know. So I've learned that the hard way actually. Sometimes you have to give something a lot of time and not just the first hurdle you get. Go, actually doesn't work. We haven't got the buy-in. Let's try something else. It's a difficult judgment, that, which gets back to the other point of that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is, and I'm generally inclined to, what's the next new thing? What's the
Yeah,
next new thing? And especially with leadership development, it's like, well, what's a new tool I can give people? But actually, we've sort of taken stock a couple of times and said, actually, what we need to do is go back to the beginning almost and remind people what the initial tools were, and re-embed, embed the same techniques over and over, so that it becomes more of a habit, rather than, oh, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one.
yeah, yeah.
It definitely.
Curiosity's never been said here before, which is it's interesting because I did a lot of work with a UTC in Aycliffe, a specialist college, and one of the themes they had in the last session was they were asking what traits should they be helping to teach young people, and what traits would young people want to show in the work. And I said curiosity because actually, and they were a bit like, not sure at first, but I said it is because actually I think young people who are curious about the career or about their colleagues or about the business, I think that's almost like a real hidden trait that people don't show necessarily. But it's a leisure trait, but it's just a trait that I think people who do well in business have.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's my new kind of buzzword.
Yeah,
It's just, I think it's so important, and just being curious to think about how you could do your job a little bit better. So it's
yeah,
not just for leaders by any means. In fact, again, when I was sort of thinking about this, I thought those three things are also how you would describe a really committed or high performing employee would
yeah,
be, all those things. Just we're looking at like digital tools and things like that at the moment, and people being curious to just try using AI for something, or to use a different tool to see how they could do their job a bit better. But if you're not curious, if you're just doing the same thing every day, you'll never find
yeah,
that way forward or that way out. So yeah, I think for kids as well, I definitely think it's a really important skill, and they're so
yeah,
curious when they're younger.
yeah, yeah.
Feels like, when do we teach people to stop being
Yeah,
curious?
exactly that. And it's that because it can link in with, you can go on forever, but it links in with emotional intelligence. If you talk about your own self-development, why do when I'm doing this, why do I feel a certain way? Or what is it about this that I enjoy? What is it about this that I don't enjoy and frustrates me? It's that curiosity in ourselves and how we feel as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I enjoy reading and listening to podcasts, and so I'm constantly learning about leadership, and yeah, and that sort of feeds into my practice at work and all this kind of stuff. So it is just constantly being ready to think about new ideas. But like I say, you can go too far with it, and then you may just never make a decision because you're too busy thinking of new ideas and never get anything done, or vice versa. You just change direction all the time.
Yeah, 100%. I'm interested, and we'll go back to the culture piece and the change. I think that'll be a interesting thing to talk through. I'm interested for people who don't know who you are to understand your background, because obviously, people come into HR from various different avenues and reasons. Was it something you always wanted to do? Was it a course that you always wanted to go on to? That was the where I want to be, or how did you fall into the wonderful world of HR?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I did a philosophy degree, which doesn't naturally lead to any particular career. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left uni, so I kind of fell into the job at Nigel Wright. I was a recruitment consultant then for 5 years, mostly for the first 4 years looking after finance recruitment, or not looking after doing finance recruitment. And it was such a good job for me because I was really naive. I didn't know anything about business, really. I didn't understand sort of really, the different structures, what they did. So it was amazing to be able to spend all that time going out and visiting businesses around the Northeast, getting to understand how they worked. And the one thing that I was reflecting on the other day, how it's impacted my current role is, you'll know, when you're matching a candidate and a business, an awful lot of it is about that fit and that culture.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to understand, you'd go out and meet a client and you'd spend an hour with them trying to understand the business, and being able to quickly decipher what their culture is. And then likewise, you're meeting the candidates for an hour and then being able to match that. And and I think I'd got that right quite a lot of the time. And you'll know as well. You put a number of people forward for an interview, and you're like, "Oh, I know which one's going to get it. It's going to be this one."
Yeah.
A lot of the time, not always, but some of the time you're right, because it's that they've got that cultural fit. So I do think that helps, kind of just that. I don't know. It's almost like a gut feel to be able to judge that. And then I did my CIPD at Niger Wright, so I did know at some point during that period, I guess, that I wanted to move into HR. And then I was lucky to move into Akzo Nobel in a generalist HR role, which I think is quite unusual for people moving from not just going to an internal recruitment role. And that was brilliant. I was there for 10 years. I did many different roles within that. So there were loads of different opportunities to learn, work with salespeople, manufacturing. I was on the Felling site, a large site with a lot of big manufacturing sites. So yeah, it was definitely a great opportunity there to learn about HR and all of its different forms. And then came here just over 5 years ago. So now manufacturing is my home.
Yeah, and two great businesses. Two businesses with a wonderful name, a long history, and but I think people can just presume that because a business has been going for 100 or so years, or have X amount of staff, that it's all easy and it's I think there's a misconception there where it's not. Every company has its pros and cons, and every company is different culture, and every office, Akzo Nobel would have had different culture at their Felling site to what they will have now in their Northumberland site. And it's, people sort of that. I'm interested. It's interesting, in fact, you come from that background, because like you say, you'll understand culturally on the recruitment side, because actually sometimes there is a transactional thought to recruitment where you'll understand that isn't the case. And I imagine that helps you when you're speaking to hiring managers and the operational piece, that, it's not just about the interview process, or actually the interview process is so important, because it's got to be got to be two way. So do you think in many ways, I also imagine recruitment's taught you some resilience and some some hard work on that side to it. So do you think that's helped you in the career you've had?
Yes, I think so. Understanding what motivates people and why people leave as well. I think, why people leave their job, and what's attractive to people. And I've always thought that if you go to an interview and you are yourself, and likewise, if the business is themselves, if it's not the right fit, like if you're rejected because you're not the right fit for a role, then that's a good thing, because if you've been who you are, then it's not going to be the right job for you, so you wouldn't end up enjoying it. So I guess maybe that philosophy degree comes in.
It gets back to the curiosity piece, isn't it? Obviously, you've always been curious about, about people and about how everything works, and that's obviously a trait that you've always had, I imagine, since you were very little, I presume.
I haven't really thought about it, but yes, I probably have.
Yeah.
But it's I am. I have been curious, and it's interesting to look back and reflect on that, which I haven't really done before.
You've obviously, when we talked beforehand and when we talked just then, you've mentioned culture a couple of times. Why is culture important to you, would you say?
We spend an awful lot of our time at work.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for everybody to kind of feel fulfilled at the end of the day. So my ultimate aim is that I want everyone, ideally, maybe we'll never quite get to everyone, but when they're walking out the turnstiles at the end of the day, for everyone to feel like they've had not necessarily like a good day. I don't necessarily expect people to be skipping out of the turnstiles, but to feel like they've had a meaningful day, or they've contributed. And we've all had awful days when it's been really, really hard, but I've never left thinking, God, I never want to go back there again. I've always thought, okay, well, it's been tough, but I've done something meaningful, done something good. And I'd love that for everybody. I think that's really important. And I think that there's a key link between sort of your commitment to the organization and engagement, and it's kind of in a cyclical, really. So if you're committed to the organization, you're going to do a really good job and you're going to get meaning out of what you do, and that's going to make you feel engaged. But equally, it's really hard to be committed to what you're doing if you're not engaged.
Yeah.
So there's kind of, I don't know what comes first, engagement or commitment. The two things are linked and then feed each other. And that comes from the culture. You can't have committed, engaged employees if you've got a terrible culture where everyone hates coming to work. And not that that's where we are or were, but that's ultimately what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, I completely agree. You and I have had this conversation before that it's actually a fear for me to end up, to work in a position or have a role in any capacity that I dreaded every Sunday night coming and it's a real sad thought in my eyes. A lot of people do feel like that. A lot of people feel like that they live for the weekend. And exactly that. I'm not naive to think people would skip coming to the office, into my office. I'm not. I appreciate that, but it would fill me with dread thinking people hate working here. But that is the reality, unfortunately, for a lot of the workforce in many industries. And I think until people realise that should change and needs to change, I don't think it will. Thankfully, there are people like you that obviously are in businesses to do that, who actually care, because you've got to care about people before you really care about that problem, don't you? It has to come from the heart.
Yeah, it does. And I don't think anybody's sort of setting up a business with the intent of making their employees feel terrible. No. But it's an unintended consequence sometimes of the way that you do things. You do have to be kind of, I don't know, mindful or conscious about what you're trying to do. It has to be deliberate to achieve the culture that you're trying to achieve, I think. And it requires everyone to be on board. And that's really difficult. So you're right when you said about being with an established business. There are things that are easier in that we are well established. We've got a head office that will support us. We're not, we're not a small business where cash flow is a particular problem, for example. Albeit, we still need to make money and things. But the counter to that is we've got people who've been here for a really long time, which has huge benefits as well. But it does mean then changing things is really difficult. Whereas you mentioned the Agson Bell Ashington site, they were able to set up and define their culture from the beginning, how they wanted it to be, which is a huge, and they've achieved it. It's brilliant. That's a huge advantage in a way, that you can set your stall out. You're not having to turn everybody around from one direction to the next.
Yes.
So definitely pros and cons of a
big I completely agree, because I don't think 100 years ago people were talking about culture. Do you know what I mean? And I think the longer you've done something, the harder it is to change, and the longer it takes to change. Because actually, if you're working with someone who's worked for an organization for 40 years, they're probably, and I'm stereotyping, more resistant to change than someone who's been there for 2 years. That's probably, I am stereotyping, but that's probably the reality, in all honesty. So I agree. There's massive pros and cons there. How do you start to change? Because there's a lot of really well-established manufacturing firms you have got, which is a real pro. They've got a lot of people who've worked in that organization a long time, and unfortunately, a lot of those skills are going to walk out the door, and there's that other argument about succession planning. But how do you start to change a culture or tweak a culture? Because it's not something you can necessarily change overnight.
Yeah, the way that we approached it was, when I started, we started leadership development training for a number of reasons, but we did. And then sort of as we started through that, after the first few modules, we kind of had a pause and said, okay, what do we think our culture is? So we did the insights survey. Do you know the insights with the
yes?
So we all did our surveys, and we found that a lot of the management team were very blue and red. So we kind of stopped and thought, okay, well, what impact does that have on the organization? If we're very task focused, there's not that many people who are people focused. What's the impact? And it's like, well, maybe people don't feel like they're particularly they're focused upon. And so we, as a leadership team, then recognized that we needed to change the culture. So that was the first thing, kind of getting everybody bought in. But I believe that the biggest change in a culture is how you are led day to day. I think that's going to have the biggest impact, and the biggest impact on engagement and commitment. Because if you're led well and you're treated well, that is going to be the reason. That's more likely to be the reason that you stay above anything else. But also then after becoming more and more conscious about those decisions that we're making. So we were quite a patriarchal sort of top-down business, and trying to shift that and trying to think about, well, can we say yes to this request instead of saying no? And can we do more coaching, for example, and ask people to think of their own ideas? Whereas before it'd been, well, you ask me what to do and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And, and so empowering people a little bit more. So it's equipping leaders as far as possible with different tools to manage the business. And then we didn't actually kind of announce the plan for a culture change for a couple of years, partly because we wanted to try and make some of those changes not quite behind the scenes, but
totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then we did announce it, and then we then said, these are the expectations for everybody. This is what you can expect from the business. This is what we expect from you. And that it was quite interesting, because I think once we kind of went out and said, this is what we're trying to achieve, we recognize we're not there yet, but this is what we want to be. Almost immediately people are like, oh, hold on a minute. Like, if you're trying to achieve that, well, we're not there yet. So maybe it's worse than we thought it was. So we did get that kind of
pushback.
Back a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess it sort of almost made it a little bit harder to begin with to push over that hump. But we're definitely getting there. And I feel, what's the word? I don't know, proud of what we've done so far. We haven't got to where I want to go, where I want to get to, but people are talking about the fact that things have changed. And we had someone who left the business actually for a period and went to work abroad, and then came back, and she said, "Oh, I can feel the difference." So from over 1-2 years or something. So things like that were, because when you're day to day, you don't necessarily notice it all the time. It's like when you're watching your kids grow, you don't notice. But having someone come back and say, "Oh, actually, yeah, I can see all the change that's been happening," was definitely a good moment.
It's one of the most untapped resources, that, particularly the leadership piece, because it's a big problem in manufacturing that people are typically good at their job and they're brought in and they're thrust into management without sometimes even putting their hand up. Particularly now, I would say, because actually, particularly now where companies are tightening their belts a little bit and they perhaps haven't got the cash flow to bring in an external manager, I think the right thing to do is look within. But there's one thing, organically looking and promoting people, but actually they've got to be ready to manage, because it's the hardest job, going from an engineer, for example, to a manager. And suddenly your colleagues now work for you, in essence, without any that's a real quick way for people to sort of lose touch with the organization. And people still leave for poor management, more so, I think, than anything else, benefits and salary and that side to it. I think there's a big gap between people getting mismanaged because their managers haven't been trained effectively. And I think actually, if you've had the confidence to not only have the promotion to a manager level, but actually to have had the training, officially, whether that be, and that's another question, is whether it be external trainer, because there is a difference sometimes than someone's quite proud to go, actually, I'm going through an official, leadership qualification at ILM, I'm level 5, versus this is a Komatsu training program that we're doing organically. There's pros and cons to that. Which way have you done? Have you almost created your own leadership school, or have you gone through official qualifications so they have X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, we do a bit of both. So we've run the ILM 5 program with sort of on-site, with an on-site cohort with an external trainer. So it's been ILM 5 but tailored to us. So that's been really positive. But the leadership development I was just talking about then was bespoke. It was actually based on, or I used a book called The Leadership Balance Scorecard. I can't remember exactly what it's called, by Dave Cody. And it's really interesting because it's about focusing on understanding yourself, understanding your team, and then there's the organizational part, the brand part. But it was the first book I'd read that was really actually pretty practical in terms of how you can kind of build an inclusive culture. And so that's what we did. So we focused on understanding yourself a bit more first, then translate that into, okay, well, what does that mean for your team and how you manage your team? and some of that we delivered, or myself and my team have delivered. Some of it we've used external consultants, depending on what the topic is. So we've mixed it up a little bit. And I'm a big believer in using different trainers, because I think they bring different skills, and some people are more I don't know, feel more connected to it, some trainers than others. And they bring different ideas. So a bit of everything. But I do agree that being promoted within your own team is incredibly difficult. And we've just started, actually, over the last sort of year or so, trying to put in more focused support for people during that transition time. And that's something we want to do going forward, is probably sometimes an internal coach, because we've trained some internal coaches, and sometimes external, a bit of support before they take the role, and then afterwards. So what are the key things that they need to focus on to make that jump effective? And it's not about, what systems they need to use. It's about that kind of the personal change that they need to make to be successful.
Apologies for interrupting this episode with a very quick announcement about my business. Theo James are a specialist talent provider specifically to the manufacturing and engineering sector. I am incredibly proud of what we've achieved since our inception in 2015. We specialise in roles from semi-skilled trades right the way up to our TJ exec search arm of the business, both on the contract and permanent side. We offer both bespoke one-off campaigns for hard-to-fill roles, or a full partnership service where we become an extension of your business. For any information, please get in touch with me or the team. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Thank you. Well, you've obviously made some changes which have had an impact, which is great. And it isn't easy, and it does take time, and you never nail it. It's always changing. It's always gradual. I guess you get the feedback. Where would you, in a perfect world, if you fast forward 5 years' time, where would you love to get to? Where would you get to a stage where you go, I'm sure you're proud already, but I'm super proud, and this is what I vision should happen. What would that look like for you?
I think it would be, if you were to come into the organisation, for example, and walk around, if you were to go up to somebody and sort of ask them, what it feels like to work here, for example, they'd tell you a good story, but they'd know what the vision is, what we're trying to achieve. They'd know what our purpose is. They'd know what our values are, not necessarily like word for word, but the essence of what we're trying to achieve. And like I said, I mean, you can't really measure it, but
it's possible to measure. It's a feeling, isn't it?
That's that feeling of when people leave. Like I say, that they feel fulfilled when they're leaving. And there's an element of you recommend the Komatsu is a great place to work, for example. That's a good sign. But we have that already, actually, to a large degree. But people, just wanting to come to work, and being able to articulate what we're aiming for, and participating in that. By the word journey, but in
one of the challenges that I hear a lot of HR leaders face in businesses, particularly probably bigger organizations, is the almost the transparency between, or the lack of communication, I guess, gap between people who are on the shop floor, for example, and let's say office-based staff. Because actually, it's quite easy to get communication down to office-based staff. Everyone's on email. It's easier to talk to those people because they're in the room together. They're not on shift. They're all, they're perhaps 9 to 5. And then there's people who work on the shop floor who don't have access to email. They are on shifts, and sometimes their shifts are past the night. That's a common problem that I hear a lot of HR leaders and businesses have. Is that something you've had to try and tackle, would you say, on site?
Yes, for sure. We and our engagement results always show a difference between our shop floor and office staff. It is really difficult. I don't think we always get it right. We are trying to communicate more effectively. But you're right, it's really easy to send an email to the office-based employees. We use the sort of team leader briefings, and we have monthly managers meetings where the managers go out and do a monthly briefing, for example. There's still work to do on that, I would say. And in terms of how we were always quite formal with our communication as well, and trying to change that. So now, like, we put out a briefing and we have FAQs underneath it. So that's I think that's helped, and trying to just be a bit more personal with our communication. So it's more human. I think sometimes people forget that leaders are human.
Mhm.
So we've definitely tried to, but yeah, I don't think we've succeeded so far completely. There's always still work to do, and we're looking at trying to sort of digital communications and trying to push out more messages that way.
That makes perfect sense, and I do. I think that is it's an issue that I think a lot of companies are trying to tackle because it's definitely, again, like anything, it's not something we can tackle overnight. I think that's something that probably has to come from the top, and I think most things we're talking about here have to come from the top. I think if culture doesn't come from the leaders within the business, it's
Mhm.
never going to change. And I think I've seen a lot of examples of that where it might even come from middle management, but ultimately, if it doesn't come right from the top, it doesn't, which can be difficult in organizations which have multiple offices and different cultures within those businesses, and it's a difficult. What advice would you have for leaders, would you say, who are really struggling to get their leadership team on board with any changes in the business, would you say?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I lucky, relatively lucky in that I, I think the senior leadership team were sort of on board relatively
Yeah.
quickly. Wouldn't necessarily say everybody was driving the change immediately, but that's changed significantly sort of over that 5 years. I wonder whether, for me, showing everybody that that I was talking about the insights,
Hmm.
almost like saying, do we think? I asked the question, do you think the culture is sort of right, or we need to do something about it? And the answer was resoundingly, yeah, we need to change it. I thought that, but I wasn't coming in saying, "Oh, we need to change the culture." The difficulty we had was there was no burning platform. We were still making really good quality machines. We were, really efficient. We were a successful business and still are. So there wasn't that real push to say, if we don't change this, we need to change this to be able to get out of the mess
Yeah.
that we're in. But there was a recognition that if we don't change now, that the workforce is changing in the future, so we need to do it. So that was the difficulty, I guess. What advice would I give? Trying to get people to realise it themselves is obviously like a. It's so difficult because I don't. Trying to give people the evidence, I find really difficult, and I
Yeah.
do struggle with this. I was talking to our senior management team recently that I've been working in the sort of HR and recruitment field now for 20 years. I've read loads of books, done loads of podcasts, spoken to loads of different people. You kind of acquire quite a lot of knowledge. So when someone says, "Well, why are we doing this?" It's like, well, almost can't explain it because it's like I remember which bit
You
of
go to
research,
theory. Yeah. Yeah.
but all these different things, and some of them confirm what you've read in other ones, and all the rest of it. So it all pulls together. Um, that's not really a very helpful answer. Answer, is it?
Yeah,
But
but I think what you're saying there is, because ultimately, I think you said it before, that it's the justification of it, isn't it? It's the justification of whatever that reason that is. Is it because the business needs to do X, Y, and Z? Is it because there's a failing team on the retention side and people leaving? I guess it's the justifying, like anything. I think it's justifying why something needs to be happening in the first place. But what's in it for them? Because ultimately, it's too easy, isn't it, as leaders to go, well, we must change this because I'm getting pressure from the top that, the group isn't making enough money or this target isn't being, but actually, why should people on the shop floor care really? What's like anything, what's in it for them? And I think that's fair. I think as humans, we have to selfishly know what's in it for us. Otherwise, it's very difficult to have a vision to some extent, isn't it?
yeah, it's yeah. I think the answer, and again, it's hard to, it's always hard to prove it. I find it difficult anyway, But if you have an engaged and committed workforce, if everybody is therefore 10% more efficient, or 5%, whatever, it makes your job as a leader an awful lot easier. And when we come to looking at the coaching, yeah, it might take you a little bit longer in that initial moment when somebody comes to you with a problem, instead of
Hmm.
just giving them the answer, to coach them. But then next time you've built up that knowledge and that skill, so that they don't come and ask you the next time, and you're developing people and to be able to think for themselves. Um, so yeah, whether you can explicitly say we've done this and therefore our productivity has gone up, there are so many other factors that impact
Yeah.
productivity and all the rest of it. I think that's really difficult to do, but that's the logic that. But also, I almost think, do we need to prove it? Surely, having a workforce of people who are fulfilled and want to work here, it's just, why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything very well. Okay, leadership development potentially does cost something, but leading people in a different way doesn't cost you anything different in the moment,
Yeah.
does it? But it makes you have to think about it. So yeah, people are seeing the benefit of doing things differently as well. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the really good things that we, again, go back to the insights. We found people were having really difficult relationships with certain people over and over and over again. Did the insights, learned that they were a different color energy to them, and then changed their style, and immediately, like literally immediately, had a much better relationship with those individuals. So the proof is there.
Yeah.
In the interactions and the differences that are made, but it's whether you putting a number on it, I think, is the difficult part.
So what's the book Chimp Paradox? That's a great book, isn't it? Have you read that one before?
I've read a bit of it.
Yeah,
I've read all of it, but
it is full on actually, but it makes you realize why you feel and think a certain way, and how it's fascinating. The skills gap is a big problem in manufacturing, and will only get worse. Komatsu were well known for the apprenticeship scheme, and people work there for a long, long time, which is great. My issue is not manufacturing. I do get it. A lot of people talk about the skills gap, but probably aren't doing much about it. Komatsu obviously are and always have done. Why has that always been important and part of the culture there to make sure that apprenticeships is a priority for them?
Yeah, I mean, employee development has been part of our Komatsu way. It was sort of the set of principles that were set up when Komatsu was founded, 100 and whatever years ago. So it's always been a key part of our business, and it makes sense to invest in apprentices, and even in, I think it was before my time, because I joined after a lot of COVID had happened. So I think that might have been sort of one of the only years that we didn't actually bring in a full intake. Because we do have long service as well, you've kind of always got that pipeline of people who are going to retire.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people do sort of retire from the business rather than resigning earlier, and so it's important to have that throughput. But growing your own talent is a lot easier in a way than bringing in somebody else who's learn different ways of doing things, and you're trying to then sort of convert them to your way of doing things. But yeah, that employee development part has always been a core part of our business, and that is why we do an awful lot of promotions from within. So recruitment consultants nightmare, but but we have lots of people who'll move from the shop floor to a trainee quality position, trainee production engineer position, and then we put them through the relevant training that they need to do. So there are lots of opportunities to move cross-functionally as well, which I think it can be quite rare. You don't need to have had experience in a certain area. So yeah, I definitely think it's important. And we do the same with graduates. We have at least one a year,
Right.
generally. Again, they rotate through through a number of different departments, and then end up in a permanent role at the end of it.
Yeah, and I think companies, I think you could be forgiven sometimes to think it's a business which is people work for, it's a job for life, and they're only there because of X, Y, and Z benefits. But no, people, just because the salary or the benefits are good doesn't mean now people will stay. If it's a poor culture, if there's poor management, people will leave. So the fact that the retention is still being very, very good has to be testament to people like yourself who have come in and gone, oh, this is great. This is a site that's been there for 100 years and retention so low, but we've got to keep moving forward. We've got to keep progressing, because unfortunately in this market, we've still seen, even recently, companies that have been around for 100 years who have unfortunately not succeeded. And it's just, unfortunately, it means nothing now, which is really, really sad, because those companies aren't getting protected like they once were. So you have to invest in your people, with time, culture change, with management, with benefits. Now it doesn't have to be the biggest benefits, the biggest salary. It's understanding people's drives and what changes and why they want to come to work. Because ultimately, exactly what you said right at the start, you're driven by people not dreading coming to work, which is it sounds basically what it isn't, is it? Because it is a problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm fortunate in that I really love my job, and I have done for the vast majority of my career. But there have been a couple of times when, I haven't been particularly engaged, and I definitely wasn't committed to the business at the time, and not in my current job. But I can remember like when there was a particular time, it's like I had one thing on my to-do list and I didn't manage to get it done. I did other stuff. I don't know what I was doing, but I didn't get that one thing I was meant to do done. I was like, how have I managed it? But when you're feeling sort of really disengaged, it is difficult, and you're not committed to doing the best that you're doing. You're not curious. You don't care. You
Yeah,
don't, you're not necessarily making good judgment.
yeah,
Sort of going back to those three things from before. So, yeah, it's definitely important
yeah.
to focus on the people.
A couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. Obviously, manufacturing is a difficult point right now. It's a tricky market. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the industry, what would it be?
Ooh. Um, what would I change about the industry? I don't know. Um, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would change anything about the industry in particular. It feels like maybe there's like an obvious answer that I'm missing, but I think if I had a magic wand, what I would do is make everybody curious, committed, and have a good judgment. Um, that would be my ideal. Yeah, I don't know.
Which actually is, I think, is testament to who you are for that answer. Because actually, a lot of people who are going, "Well, I'll do this because the manufacturing industry will be better off." But actually, it's interesting how driven you are personally by people being happier, by
Mm,
people being. It probably because you've done a lot of work on yourself over the years to be progressing and to read books and
mm,
to listen to podcasts, and that obviously it's built into you that you get satisfaction from seeing people grow and
mhm.
seeing people have those traits, which is frustrating, isn't it? When people in front of you who don't show that, it's like a
Yeah.
double-edged sword. That's be fair. So
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true. I mean, from an industry point of view, you could talk about, like prices of parts and all the rest of it, and but those things, well, they're important, but how much control we have over those, I don't know. But like I say, I think those things will always um,
those
they'll always
exist. Yeah,
there'll always
yeah,
be external factors, but something that we can control or certainly influence heavily is what's going on inside our
yeah,
organisation. What's happening in the industry is a lot harder to impact. Or even if you had a magic wand and made one thing better, something else would pop up that would make it more difficult. So yeah, I think. Well, yeah, I think encouraging people to be sort of open-minded, and I'm also generally an optimist, which I think helps. However, that's clearly not the case for everybody all the time. I think that's sometimes difficult to deal with as well when you implement something new or introduce something and you think it's going to be, you expect that everyone might not be jumping over hoops with it, but the sort of the negativity that sometimes comes back, and it's those voices that you hear the most sometimes, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, when it's only a few, but they're the only ones you listen to in your sort of darker times.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I'd also make everyone optimistic.
They're the ones to plague it 3 a.m. So no, 100%. And just finally, what are you excited about the next sort of 12 to 18 months in business? What's happening, which you sort of concentrating on at the moment?
Ooh, well, continuing my culture change program is a big
Yeah.
one. We've got a day in few weeks actually, which is all the sites together. We're calling it Thrive Together Day because it's part of our purpose. Bringing everybody together. It's a full day like non-production, and we're focusing on safety, well-being, culture, etc. So that's a really key thing, and just sort of generally like our helping move the business forward. That sounds a bit trite, but we're we're a sort of contract manufacturer, so we manufacture for our head office, um, and but we're I don't know, really kind of taking responsibility for our own destiny, and that's interesting for me, having just been in an HR role, being in a really senior leadership role as well for the whole business, and that brings with it lots of interesting challenges. So that definitely for me is something that's new and exciting. Well, not so new, but it's still exciting to be able to do.
Thank you. Thank you for this, because it's been really fascinating. It's been interesting because I'm interested in people, and I was interested in. I've been fascinated by your drivers and why you do what you do, and why you care about what you care, and it's quite clear you care about a legacy you leave behind you of people enjoying the job, which I think it's brilliant, because not a lot of people have that sort of mindset. A lot of people have, progression for them is very different. It might be a certain type of management or whatever it is. And I think it's been, and I think that recruitment's an interesting one. But for me, good recruiters are curious. Good recruiters are interested in people and care about people, whether that be the candidates or their clients. And you've obviously carried that trait right through to HR, because again, I believe really good HR professionals care about the people. I think if it comes from there first, then it doesn't come from a transactional hit and number place. That's ultimately where people buy into. And great businesses have great HR teams. It's as simple as that. For me, it's such an important part of the business. And I think this has been really fascinating, because people will look at companies like Komatsu and just think that, okay, they've been there for 100 years. Things just must happen. They don't have to work at things. But I think it's been really, really encouraging for a lot of people who perhaps work for small businesses to go, oh, great, Katie's battling through this as well, and she's come out the other end. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't something you just ever nail. It's forever. It's challenging, but actually, I'm really pleased we honed in on that leadership training piece, because I am a massive believer in that is the biggest game changer in your business. If you create leaders in your business and you don't have to bring them on externally, which I shouldn't say, but I honestly think it's the missing trait. People who come through your business, sometimes you do need external voices and different opinions, but people who've worked their way up the business, they're the ones that understand what's right, what's wrong, how can progress. So it was fascinating. I think this will be a nice episode for people to listen to go, yeah, we're not really doing that, but we've talked about it. Let's actually get together and create a school within the organization.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, it's and also, like, our culture wasn't absolutely horrific when I started either. I don't want to sort of misrepresent it. It's always, you can always do more. After, I don't know, a year or so of the leadership development program, the question was, well, when are we finished with this? I was like, oh, never.
No, yeah.
There's always a new module. There's always sort of something new I could do. And I think keeping that momentum up and keeping that learning going, eventually, hopefully, people then sort of take it upon themselves to do their own learning and stuff as well. And I do think I think you can make people happy at work if you give them for a moment, by giving them coffee, by giving them nice environment, all these kind of things. I think that those things they're not unimportant, but like you say, having meaning in your work, feeling like you've done a good job, getting some recognition or appreciation for it, and knowing that you're valued. I think those are the things that, when you leave the day, but also the job, if you feel like that's been your career and that's been your work life, I feel like that's something that's gonna stay with you longer than a free cup of coffee.
Free fruit. Yeah, exactly. But no, thanks, Katie. That was great. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of the Manufacturing Leaders Podcast. Please just like or subscribe. It really helps grow the show and obviously improve the industry. If you want any more information about Theo James, as I mentioned midway through the episode, please get in touch with me or the team. I would love to talk about how we can help you directly or your business. We are more than just a recruiter, and I know people say that, but it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. We are in business for much more than just a bums on seats approach. We want to help people grow. We want to help improve their lives. And ultimately, I want to work with businesses and people who share the same values as we do. And that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So please, if that is you and you are passionate about that dream role or passionate about your people, please get in touch with me or the team. I would absolutely love to talk a bit more detail. Thank you very much. Speak soon.